Okay, so yeah, thanks a lot for joining, everyone. We are at our second sync, and as always, let's start by looking through what's the highlights from the last couple of weeks. So today is the end of January 29th, and the first and biggest update I think we want to talk about is last event we mentioned that we were working on a Hugging Face integration. It's pretty much been finalized now, and the good news is that we've uploaded a lot of new Lance datasets on a new Hugging Face organization, Lance format. And right now there are a few datasets uploaded here. We're going to be doing a lot more work to update different kinds of datasets in different domains, all the way from image, audio, robotics, biomedical, like multiple other domains. But right now we have different modalities covered. We have a text data set, we have a video data set, and we're working on the robotics one, and also an image data set here. But I think the most exciting thing here is the feature that just got implemented this morning, which is the video blob preview on the Hugging Face hub directly. So what this is doing is scanning the Hugging Face storage layer for a set of frames in the video data set, retrieving the raw blobs, filtering down to what frames are representative in the first a few seconds. And then that's what it's being previewed here without actually transferring any data from the Hugging Face backend. So very, very cool feature, makes it a lot easier to inspect and view the data visually before actually beginning to work with it. So a lot more interesting stuff on the Hugging Face side coming soon. And we'll be announcing this. Yeah, go ahead.
Is that a Hugging Face feature, the one you just talked?
So it's built on top of the Lance format because the format enables us to retrieve frames based on the offset IDs.
I see.
So, but it is implemented on this dataset viewer, which is the Hugging Face hub's front end.
Oh, that's super cool.
Yeah, so they actually been working very closely with us, and they've done some fabulous work in the last couple of weeks. So we're going to be writing a blog and publishing this next week in terms of what went into this and how it's powered, basically. So that's the Hugging Face update. And then two other community updates. The project Lance Context was introduced in the last meeting. So we went through the voting process, and yeah, thanks to everyone who voted. But basically, the project is now part of the Lance format organization on GitHub. It'll be maintained here through community updates. I think most of the commits are coming in from Benan and some other contributors here. So these are all open for contributions from the community. The same is also true for the Lance Graph project, which also was started by Benan, but now is gaining a lot more traction. So this one basically has had a few releases in the last couple of weeks. And we also ran a benchmark on the Lance Graph project. We posted about that on LinkedIn last week. The good news is that the Lance Graph benchmark is performing quite well already without any major optimizations in place. There's only this is a benchmark suite that I ran where the last two queries are the ones that it's slower than some other solutions. But then, yeah, there's a lot of scope for improving performance here, and some of the contributors are working hard on the performance side. So again, anyone who's interested in contributing to these projects, please feel free to go in there and file issues or make PRs. I'll also highlight a few more updates from the community that happened in the last couple of weeks. We had the Ray distributed vector index PR that got merged, I believe. Yep. So if anyone on the call is there and would like to shout out, this was from the ByteDance folks, please feel free to jump in. We had a Spark vector search feature that came about. And then more Spark features here. Anyone has any specific comments on this? I see one from Jesse from Netflix here, the distributed FTS index on Spark. And then another merge into feature. So all the PRs are linked here. We don't need to go into each of them. And a mem table and wall writer and reader update. So I believe all of these are going into the next release of Lance, the next SDK, which I think is the next topic here, the 2.00 release. We have the RC4 release candidate 4 out for votes right now. Does anyone have any updates on that front?
Yeah, this one I just got in the morning, which contains the fix for the B tree. So hopefully this is the last RC we do, and we could get it out.
I was literally updating my cargo tomls to point to this before the meeting started. So I will be testing it right now.
I had some issues doing verification a long time ago. I think this is for 1.0.0. So I'll take another look at this and see if I can get it running.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, does anyone run verification in like Lance Spark, for example, with this?
Yeah, I think for the Spark and the Restart projects, last week I added the autobump feature as well. So currently, I think there should be already a PR that is pumping this to the latest RC, and we will see that all the tests are passing.
Yeah, I was gonna note one thing they kind of like that Data Fusion does in their releases, that they have a little checklist of like downstream projects that might verify the release works with them. So maybe we went to add some of the commonly checked ones like Lance, Spark. We could add Lance DB to that list because we always check that, and a few others. I'll just make a note of that, and maybe I'll do that. Sounds good.
Yeah, feel free to put rerun on there. I mean, that's why I'm here.
Are we ready to go into the discussion topics?
Yeah, can talk about that in a second.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to know we had two proposals for adding logical types. I think our current sort of schema definition and spec is basically sort of hand wavy, like we support various arrow types, and then we have some mapping and defined in code. And I think I opened, let me see. I have some PR actually to add more of a written down spec trying to describe some of it. I think it would be nice to eventually have something that's a lot more specific and like how we want to define how schemas work. But right now it's sort of just like however it works in practice. The proposals that are sort of up are basically just adding things that aren't really on some level logical types, right? They're both new variations of strings or encodings of strings and new encodings of decimals. So, there might be like these are types that exist, for example, that exist in Parquet. But I think it's sort of just mirroring the pattern of, or continuing the pattern of mirroring Apache arrow types. Yeah, is it a file format change? I don't know. That's a good question, actually.
I can chime in on the PR, but it might be nice if the file layer is just arrow types and the tables, like the logical schema, stays in the table layer. It's like one thing we might want to define for a logical type is what is the physical type that we use to store it, which is just an arrow type.
Yeah, I have another question. We had a discussion before to discuss about removing the logic type concept from Lance entirely, and where just use arrows extension type. Is this still valid, or we just need to do that first?
Personally, I would like it to still be valid. I think logical types matter for like compute and how they interact with the query plan and how you convert from scalars and what casting rules you have. But I would like to keep all of that separate from storage, which is just like, how do I encode this onto the disk? But I can add some feedback to this PR.
Yeah, I would like to like think a little bit more. So like and I think we do have some of that separation in the proposed string and binary view implementation, where we basically say like there's sort of normal string, large string, and string view are sort of the string types in Arrow. And when we serialize them in the files, what we're actually just doing is just doing the sort of small and large variant where you have the 32-bit or 64-bit options, but beyond that, we don't have any special encoding for the view types. That's just a runtime level decision, and all the logical type is just allowing the user to sort of state, when I read this data back, what should it be returned as by default?
Yeah, I think even string view and binary view are maybe more simpler cases because there are arrow types for these. I think the interesting cases are things like JSON, the where we are storing it as binary right now. So there's more that goes on, which is mapping to an arrow type. Like a string view and list view and so on. If we say the storage layer speaks arrow, even though from a storage perspective, string view doesn't make any sense, we can still have like last encoding be aware of string view, and it can handle the serialization into an actual string when it writes it out. But then like JSON, the way it works right now is the storage layer is completely unaware of the fact that there's a JSON type. It just gets binary, and it has the appropriate extension stuff that it puts in the schema metadata, but it doesn't, like, I guess the way I think about it is if we're going to add new logical types, and we have all these different components, so we have like the file, we have indexes, we have the query engine, we have like the table mechanics as a commit and that kind of thing. I'd like to see these eventually get formalized into different components. And it's like when we add a new logical type, the fewer components that have to change, the better.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
So I wonder if there's some way that like the only thing that cares about logical types is really the query engine. And query engine is maybe not the right word, because maybe just call it engine, because it's also in charge of like, it's on the right path and that kind of thing too.
Okay. And by logical types, are you sort of saying like, you were saying this maybe more specifically, the only thing that cares about when it comes to the distinction between string view and large string, or binary and JSON type, is the engine?
I would say anything that's not just core basic arrow types.
Okay.
Like string view and binary view are core basic arrow types, but they have a lot of compute functions that kind of have to come along with them. So it's like, if you say you support these, then does that mean that if someone were to go out there and try to write a pure Java Spark engine that didn't use Data Fusion, for example, are they going to have to add all the string view and binary compute functions because we say these are official types?
Yeah, like it would be nice if there was an engine that came along that wanted to just like use this to be able to decode this, to not, if they just had a singular string type, that they could just use that and not have to care about any sort of distinction in type.
I mean, they could implement it by doing casts.
Yeah.
But they would, yeah. Anyway, this is details. I think we don't have to hash it all out right now.
Okay. Yeah. I think, but those are all good questions, and I think I'll sort of move forward with those and try to address those and think about those. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I think we can we don't have to go into the decimal 32 and decimal 64. I think it's more straightforward version of the string concept. But
Okay.
I think I'll still do a little bit of work clarifying or spec for what logical types are and how schemas work in Lance before I sort of push forward with those and you just sort of vote.
I'm not really opposed to pushing forward to anything that's mirroring arrow types.
Okay.
I think I'd only be more hesitant. Like, let's get a better definition if we're going to introduce something that is another extension type.
Yeah.
I have a question about it. So I noticed, like in Lance 2.0, we now have this GeoArrow and GeoData Fusion dependency, right, to get these geometric types, right? Are those represented in these logical types at all? Like the geometric types, or is it just, oh, that's a generic extension type? Does the question make sense?
Yeah, and I think they're just a generic extension type right now. I didn't when I was going through and like listing the different like logical types, I didn't see them in there. But we do support sort of the same concept of, or like we do preserve the arrow extension types. And I think that is like it's kind of a nice system if we can just plug that in and not have to do any sort of extra spec work on top of that to support those.
Yeah, well, so I guess then it starts to beg the question of for these logical types, like what are the exceptions then that are not just pure backed by arrow types? Like having different schema versus arrow schema is something that confused me at first. So like, what does it mean to have types that are not? Like, is it just that, okay, we're gonna have this subset that is like we've chosen to support like JSON or whatever, and then so that's like one thing that's like I'm very new to this the Lance implementation here, so that's one thing that comes up. And another, like what is it that is needed beyond just saying, oh, we'll just take all of them and do them all as extension types on top of arrow data types, and then we can just go to arrow schema type thing. Or you say, okay, now we're going to take an opinionated view, which is like, hey, these are these specific types that should be explicitly supported that are, and then anything else falls under generic extension types.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing that's uncertain is like, the interesting thing about like the JSON, right, is like, can I then mix and match? Because I can immediately imagine a scenario from like my last job where having a JSON, but it's backed by a view type, right? Because it's like, oh, they're actually very, very sparse. So like instead of having, so like I can have that JSON blow up once and then replicate it across all of the rows, right, efficiently. So would that be supported? Because it would potentially have a different underlying arrow data type than if you had a dense JSON. Does that make sense?
Yeah, are you sure you're saying like if like the string view itself or like the binary view itself was
View. Yep.
extension, then
so
the
question is having a logical type of a JSON.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible to have a logical type of JSON that's backed by a byte array, or a logical type of JSON that's backed by a binary view?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to throw too many cogs into the wheel there, but that's just like things that immediately come to mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think my initial thought on that is that I think in that case, actually, I'm not sure if we support this very well. But I know in Arrow, at the Arrow level, we probably should support this. extension types have metadata attached to them, and so you can put that extra information, including information, in the metadata, perhaps.
Let me add some context about our JSON support in Lens. And actually, we implemented our JSON support in this way, that we have a logical JSON type and is backed by a binary, and the binary is encoded by JSONB. So in our storage level, it's just a large binary, and we will do some tricky work to decode this binary into JSON when a user trying to query that. But currently we don't have a systematic way to do this. We have some very tricky code in Lens to make it possible.
So is JSON backed by only large binary?
Yeah, large binary, and
You couldn't
it's
make it-
encoded by JSONB. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting question when a user asks for a column. Sometimes there are multiple representations you could give them for that column. And how does the user specify that? Because maybe a user wants the JSON column, just keep it in JSONB, I'll take that. Maybe the user doesn't have anything to do with JSONB, they say decode on read, I want string back. Same with, or maybe they want JSONB, but they want it in view. And I think it's probably like an optimization beyond that point of maybe if the user wants it as a view, we keep it a view all the way throughout. Or even if the user doesn't want it as a view, if they have some complex projection, we use a view all the way up until the end, and then we decode to a string because that's what the user asked for. But like a way for a user to sort of say, I want this column and I want this, and it maybe cast is the way to do that. But
So then it's if cast is the method, then is it the default is that you actually just get the bytes back, right? And then you cast to like a JSON type, and then you get the decoded JSON out. Is that the idea?
I think every type would need to have like a default, the default output, which I don't know if I want that to be bytes for JSON or not. It confuses everyone. Maybe we want that to be the default as string, but if you cast, but then we have to make sure that optimization is there so we don't do like bytes, string, bytes.
Yeah, that's because that's like the worst, right?
Yeah. So that would have to be like a physical optimization of, oh, I know I can collapse this cast chain.
Oh, okay, yeah, like, yeah.
Shunwo, did you want to quickly talk about this thing? You had a comment here.
Yeah, the most widely used decimal lib in Rust ecosystem is Rust Decimal, and it only support precision less than 28. So it's very annoying if we want to add in decimal support.
So in theory, there are Iceberg users today. If they are trying to convert a table to Lens, they'll have this problem.
But the community has come up a new crate. Maybe we can use that. I just merged that here to fix the issue.
Don't we already have like arrow support for the bigger decimals?
Yeah.
I think it's more from Iceberg that Iceberg requires the decimal to be 38.
But what does Iceberg use for its internal representation? Spark?
Yeah.
Or is that what
Yes, it's part of Iceberg spec.
I guess I don't know how Iceberg Rest works.
Right. But it seems like they've done this on their end, so we should be good.
Yeah,
In the
okay.
spec, it does say scale is fixed, precision must be 38 or less for decimal. I linked in the chat.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, it was here, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that lines up with arrows. So like Lance uses arrows decimal. So we can support, I think we can support, yeah, we can support 38 or less. Then it's just, if we're going from arrow to iceberg rust, does a conversion need to happen? I don't know.
Okay, I want to make sure we have time for the other discussion topics. So I'm happy to wrap this up unless anyone has anything else to say. Feel free to comment also in those proposals.
Yep.
Cool.
I just linked another issue related to decimal, but that's more for like integration point between PyIceberg and Iceberg Rust. I don't know if you guys have seen similar things, but maybe this is just like specific to our integration. Yeah, it's the same topic. Feel free to ignore it.
Cool. I think Jack, this one's the next one you had.
Yeah, I added this one. I think this is coming out of the discussion when we were voting for the lens context. And it feels a bit redundant that we have to vote for 3 days just to get this new project started. And this is, so the proposal is to introduce a kind of incubator concept. So any PMC member can just create a new repo. And that sub-project is going to be like in incubating state. And also, I think we, some of us discussed offline that when we potentially graduate an incubating project, currently there's this difference between core project and the sub-project. However, and we kind of listed a few commonly used projects like Lens Spark, Lens Ray, also as a part of the core project. But just based on the observation of how it has been operating since we launched the governance and structure, they are not really strictly following the core project requirements. I think just by the nature of there's much fewer people working on those projects. And so this is just trying to say that Lens is the only core project, and the other ones will just remain in as a sub-project, and they will have a bit less requirements when doing the releases and when having contributors that can have write access, all those kind of things.
So this will go through a conventional voting process, right?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Cool. Seems like there's already some consensus here. So yeah, we can always continue that offline.
Is there a list of the sub-projects somewhere on the website? I know.
Yeah, actually, this is a part of the proposal to just list out. I think there's a table, but it's very out of date already.
Yeah. The speed of which it changes.
Where's the table, Jack?
If you just scroll down, yeah, in the project section.
I see sub-project as a.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Okay,
And this is very
we
out of
haven't
date.
added some. Yeah.
If you look into the discussion, I made another list over there. And actually, by the way, I put some of the projects such as DuckDB, Hugging Face also as sub-projects, although they're still pretty new. I think that is one feedback we might want to discuss in this thread about which one we still consider as incubating and which one we consider as mature. Yeah.
Yeah, good question. Sorry, Jack, could you clarify this thing again? Sub-projects, like there are some of them, I mean, they're unique in each one, right? What's the difference between this and this?
I think I really am not in room of everything. The incubating, I think, has in general few requirements. For example, it should say that sometimes people can directly merge, and we will also just add whoever seems to be contributing to the incubating project, so that we can attract more contributors into those projects. There are a few ones listed above. And where it's a sub-project, it should at least, I think one big differentiation is that we will have at least 2 or 3 maintainers that are having an eye on those projects. And so it should go through all the proper reviews for the PRs.
Yeah.
Okay.
So as like process wise, I'm going to try to repeat back in my own words and see if I got the idea correct. The idea is that some of these projects fall under the incubating category, and the incubating category maybe doesn't require a full vote of members in order to add someone as a maintainer, get maintainer right level access into that repository, so that you can bring more contributors in. The question that raises for me then is, like, when a project then goes from incubating into no longer being incubating, it's top line project. Do you then need to go in and like vote on all of those members to, or is the vote process the same on who to add as a maintainer with right access? Like, does it revert back to, and then people need to get individually added, or that's like the unclear to me and potentially a tiny bit of
Yeah,
confusion.
that's a great question. And if you see point 6, so there is a vote when to incubate to graduation.
Yep.
And currently it says that I think it's under point 7 that the contributors with right access will maintain their commit privilege. And I was actually thinking about exactly this, and I'm actually undecided, to be honest. I can see it goes either way, but currently I write it as it will just remain having the commit privilege.
All right, you already covered it. Perfect.
Shonro?
No.
You said Lance Python docs is not a separate project?
Yeah, I'm a bit confused that a docs repo could be a sub project. Should it just be a part of our core project, the Lance?
Actually, yeah.
Yeah, I think the key issue, the reason it was separated was because it was requiring a full Python build, which takes a lot of time if someone just tries to add a small change in the doc. So this is essentially a separate build to publish the read-the-doc version of PyLance. And also, if you look into the homepage of this, so actually we are not doing a good job right now. This needs to be like constantly updated so that whatever is important in PyLance, because this page you see now is handwritten. It's not auto-generated.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So there are some maintainers related to this.
Okay.
Yeah, I understand that it can be a dedicated GitHub repo, but we don't need to treat it as a project, because a project that didn't never do release has no meaning to our users. And the same will apply to Lance namespace, I guess. It should has been merged in Lance, right?
Yeah, that's true. I think for namespace, it does release packages because all the originally I remember the reason it was separated was because these are like all auto-generated code. So every time you make a huge change, it will make a small change, it will generate all the diffs, and having it in a separate project makes it much cleaner. And then it publishes all the auto-gen clients based on those. But yeah, I agree with you. Those kind of I guess for the doc, for sure. I think we can remove that.
Yeah.
And for namespace, because it has its own release versions, I think it might make sense to still keep it.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Cool.
I don't have other questions.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we should move on to some of the other topics because I think Kevin had a topic at the end. But before that, let's just quickly. I think there was another one here. Jack.
Oh yeah, this one I added. I think me and Cheryl were in a group chat with Tencent the other day, and they kind of brought up this question to us, and this is like the stuff design we had after some discussions with them. So currently we have the external manifest store concept, and this is trying to see if we can just formalize that and instead of external, and essentially listing a directory is just one case of the manifest store, and then we have a few use cases that can do different implementations. The first one is the one from like just different vendor support, because some object storage don't really have put if not exist transactional features yet. So those can do whatever vendor solution they want. And there are two other use cases if you scroll down. The first one, sorry, the second one is I think people in ByteDance are mainly driving this, that they are trying to build a partition concept on top of namespace. So, and they do want to be able to commit essentially to multiple tables. In those cases, every table is a partition. So they want to commit to multiple partitions essentially at the same time. And what we realized is that actually by leveraging the manifest store concept, we can achieve that by treating, because in the directory namespace specification, we are backing a list of tables, recording those information in another lines table. So that table essentially becomes a manifest store, and we can atomically update the version of multiple tables by committing to that lens table. So you can imagine that in the manifest store, we can add an API to say commit to atomically increment the version of multiple tables at the same time, and that will be able to satisfy the requirement. And the third one is a recent discussion with Polaris, and because one key difference today between formats like Iceberg versus Delta Hoodie Lens is that Iceberg commits always go through catalog, and on the other side, the other ones just directly go to storage because storage ensures atomicity. And some of the enterprise customers, I think even internally in SDB, were asking if they can have that go through the catalog so that they can have visibility, they can do audits, they can trigger downstream jobs, do all those things, similar to how they are doing that in Iceberg. And I felt Manifesto could be a way to achieve that, because then the catalog can provide, like, I think I put that this table versions and commit table version. They can provide all those APIs, and that essentially becomes the implementation of the Manifesto. Yeah. So this is just lots of different ideas, and just curious about what people think.
Great. I think we can carry that to the discussion stage on GitHub. And now finally, we have Kevin's topic. Was this the right one? Yeah, partitioning and liquid clustering. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, it's very cursory. I just want to bring this up and see if there are any thoughts around partitioning. There's a lot of information in the discussion already. Just curious, like, if there's any like status, how you guys are thinking about it, and the sorts. It's very open-ended.
An
I think-
old discussion.
As far as I know, no one's actively working on it. I think like, you know, some things we've wanted to get out of it is having, I think some things that could move it forward is like, one, having some sort of like benchmarks where we can really show like, this is where we want partitioning and our clustering. Like, this is where it would really benefit us.
Mhm.
So I think we also want to figure out, like, understand how it interacts with our sort of indexing and like using indexes as filters. And then I think the other thing that would help is like, I think we want to explore sort of the clustering and like liquid clustering, but I think it might be, I haven't seen like that many sort of like papers or detailed like technical descriptions of like how to best achieve that. And if someone has like research on that, I think that would also be really helpful.
Isn't there namespace work being done on partitioning?
Right. That is the one I was talking about just now. And however, I think the consensus there is that is more for like business level. Just you want isolated entities, and those you want to express those as partitions, then you can use that. But if you want, for example, storage partition drawing, all those kind of features, the direction is more on the not hard partitioning, but more on the clustering side of things. That was my impression of the latest conclusion here.
Right. So, yeah, I think that was my understanding as well. It's like clustering from the table format perspective is something that we do think we will need once we hit that use case. We expect that we will eventually need it. And partitioning, there are good reasons for partitioning at the namespace level. And there are maybe one or two reasons to still have partitioning at the table level, but it's less of a priority and more of a niche. I think the only use case that isn't likely to be effectively addressed by clustering is the user that wants to replace all of the data for a certain month or something like that. But there's mitigations and there's reasons that's kind of a niche work case and things like that. So like partitioning in the table format, I don't have a lot of enthusiasm for it necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to use case, right? I think, I guess one thing I wanted to double check my understanding here is that, you know, some of the other table formats, like, you know, starting from Hive and Iceberg as well, they declare like static partitions, right? And then you collect stats on those fields, and those are used. And partition is both a logical concept and a physical concept. I think from reading about liquid clustering and what they do, partitioning becomes more of a, you know, let's collect stats for these fields, enough stats, group them together. And then because there's not a hard declaration, a static declaration on the table level, you can manipulate that and modify it down the road. I think that is at least what I've seen, like liquid clustering is good for, right? Then as a user, you're allowed to make modifications. You can rewrite the entire table with different sets of grouping, clustering. I wonder if, like, you know, if your indexes are good enough or like really, really good, if this is even necessary, or this is just subsumed by stats collection and indexes.
That's my theory, that like if you are clustered on a timestamp column, for example, and you have just some kind of coarse-grained zone map index, then you basically have partitioning. The zones don't necessarily match to file boundaries. That's why it can be a bit of a headache for the write path. But for any kind of read path, you can very quickly identify the ranges that you need.
Yeah.
You only have to access the the data that you need. There's more minute trade-offs. I think like file metadata. I mean, we were talking about briefly just like what would happen if you had tens of trillions of rows. And then it's like, well, maybe you have so much fragment metadata that you would need some kind of partitioning, or maybe you could still do it with clustering if you had bigger fragments, or I don't know. So there's,
Yeah.
but I think I've convinced myself pretty well that any sort of read optimization that you would get from partitioning, you can get the equivalent from clustering.
Is it in terms of like use cases here, for something like storage partition join, for example, you kind of need to tell the engine that, hey, there are these things that I'm optimized for, I'm clustered for. Is there currently an interface for that?
No, like I mean, if I think of like storage partition join, you would basically want to know that you are clustered on the key column.
Yeah.
And I think if we implement clustering, we'll have to have some way of recording, what sort of cluster columns we have.
Right.
Yeah, I think I would imagine, for example, there are places you plug those information in engines like Spark, and instead of putting I'm partitioned by these keys, I'll just say I'm clustered by these keys. And then when you collect the data for the specific clustering key, like the key value combo, then you will have to do a bit more additional filtering because the file boundary is not exact. And that should be all the differences, I think.
Yeah. I think to me, it sounds like just bridging the gap between like internal like concept of like grouping things together with the index and like what the engine expect, right? Which is most of the time they expect that there is a hard partition that is static and says, give me those things so I can do optimizations like storage partition join, and it's just like exposing that interface. So I guess in summary, I guess the idea is like, what is currently there is good enough for most use case, and partitioning and clustering here is a further optimization that has not seen any like blockers or use cases for. Is that a good summary of what we just talked about?
I think so. And I think if I understand your point correctly too, you're saying like maybe a compute engine, I don't know if Spark works this way, but maybe one of the other compute engines works this way, where they say, I need to know what you're partitioned on. So you say, okay, we're partitioned on timestamp. And then it says, okay, give me all the partitions. And then the way it implements a partition, storage partition join, is it comes back and says, okay, do a join, but only with these 5 partitions or whatever. So we would need to find some way of coming up with that kind of stuff. And I think there's ways that we could do it where a partition is basically a row range and we can give you back a certain set of, but I'm not certain. It would depend on the engine. We'd have to look at it. But yeah, your summary of where we are is correct. Like we've had the discussion. I think as soon as someone is ready to jump in and start, if they have one of these problems, they would start here and they would go from here. I don't think we've ruled anything out. I think we've just formed some opinions.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think what you just said is just exposing an interface to because most of the engines, I think this is how it works. Most engines expect like certain concepts that are like pre-baked in table formats, right? So like partitions, liquid clustering, even though like, the physical layout might be different, the concept is still the same, that like, hey, this is how you can optimize. Okay, I'll go through it and read the discussion again. I think there's a lot of good information in here that you guys can publish a publish a paper just using this this discussion. But yeah.
Yeah, one thing I would be really curious about is like especially from a Spark. I know how Data Fusion would do it, but I know from like connection to Spark, like how you would do predicate pushdown, you know, and take advantage of this clustering, right? Because it's like one of the big performance optimizations, you know, in like Delta and things like that is you know, if and here's the thing is that there's a lot of like training users on how to write their queries to take advantage of predicate pushdown, right? Like there's a lot involved, and I suspect that there's going to be a different concept here, like slight variation on the concept. But the other thing, and there actually might be a big win here, is that at least when I last worked on it, you know, Delta and like it can only do very limited predicate pushdown. Like there's a very specific set of criteria in which it would work, and otherwise you get way more data than you ever cared about. So this is something I would be curious to see how it gets implemented. You know, to do something more elegant than just you know, the very, very basics. You know.
Yeah.
All predicate pushdown for us boils down to indexes. So clustering is related. Like if you're going to cluster on a timestamp column, you should also have some kind of zone map index on that column. Because the zone map index, as long as your column is ordered or mostly ordered, then it will be very effective without taking up much space. So there's almost no reason not to have one. And then we can satisfy any kind of predicate pushdown using that index. And then if you have more complicated predicates you want to push down, then it might not be a clustering question at all. It might be some other kind of index.
I think to what Tim said, I feel like it's bi-directional, right? Like you want to push down as much as possible, but then on the flip side, you want to expose as much information you have about like the layout and the what can potentially be optimized to the engines, to the users. I think one good thing about having static partition or like hard declarative partition is that you can always tell the users, if you use this field, you'll immediately cut down on the amount of stuff you read. So kind of taking that and like exposing that more like higher level is helpful, right? Because you're telling users, and sometimes, you know, that's the translation thing, right? Like the user's mind of like saying, I really only want this, and like telling the engine more information, which gets passed down to the table and file format level. Yeah. I guess one thing I wanted to ask is also, is there any kind of like metadata table here for Lens? As in, can I get a data frame of metadata? I think that's one really nice feature that Iceberg has, where I could say, hey, give me all the files, for example, right? Like, or give me all the metadata, give me all of the indexes that you have. Haven't done much research. I was just wondering if you guys know if there's a similar concept in Lens.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I think currently we have the APIs if you want to, for example, get a list of fragments, list of indexes, but they are not posed as like a schema data frame.
Yeah. I think one thing that was helpful, and we did this when I was at Stripe with, for example, like Trino and Iceberg, right? Is as almost like a DBA, you want to know what your table state is, and exposing that to the engine is super helpful. And you know, on the Iceberg side, you just like read the metadata JSON, read a manifest file, and then you just whatever you read, you just give back, right? I think that was really helpful in terms of like understanding what's going on in your table state. So I would +1 on adding that.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Yeah, and I can raise an issue for that.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. Internally, we have at least one thing that does that. Because we have a little bit of like an internal SQL client built on top of Lens, and it has some code in there to to query those things and provide something that looks like I think it was mirrored after Postgres.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I really like the concept of like treating your metadata as like, tables and data, because then you can do some like interesting things on it, right? Like you can start like doing aggregations, filtering, all kind of stats that you want to run.
I like it.
All right, so we're almost out of time. I think if there's more takeaways, we can continue this in the next session. Is there any final points? I think the takeaway is that the 2.0.0 release candidate is out for votes from PMCs and maintainers. So that's, I think, the next step for people on this call as well as people who couldn't attend. Right?
Yep.
Thank
Sounds
you.
good. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Nice to meet you all.
Yeah. Bye-bye.